I didn't come back for love. I came back so they can't lie anymore. I was 11 when my mother, Elaine Whitmore, leaned across the front seat of our station wagon and said, "Just for the summer, honey. 3 months tops." My father, Dennis, didn't say anything. He kept his eyes on the gravel road that curved like a scar into the Ohio hills. His jaw was tight, his hands too steady on the wheel. They dropped me off in front of a farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been painted since the 1960s, 2 stories, brown roof porch swing crooked on one side. It smelled like pine sap and old machines. I remember the wind pulling at my coat, the duffel bag cutting into my shoulder, and the way no one looked me in the eye when the front door opened. Walter Whitmore. My grandfather stood in the doorway, in a flannel shirt sleeves, rolled one hand gripping the frame like he didn't trust the wind either. He wasn't tall, but he seemed solid, as if the house might fall before he would. He nodded once and said, "Well, you'd better come in." Elaine kissed the top of my head without touching it. Dennis gave a flat wave. I turned, expecting at least one backward glance. There was none. The wagon pulled away, tires crunching until the sound disappeared. Inside the house creaked like it had lungs. The living room was dim, filled with books stacked under furniture legs to balance the tilt. The walls were lined with shelves, dusty frames, and a cuckoo clock that coughed every hour instead of chiming. Walter didn't offer hugs. He pointed to the staircase and said, "Your room's upstairs. It's the one with the old radio." It wasn't much of a room. Just a cot, a threadbare rug, and a window that looked out over fields so flat they felt like sky. But on the nightstand sat a flashlight and a small folded towel. Someone had thought ahead. I held that flashlight like a hand. That first night I lay in bed with my shoes still on. I kept imagining they'd knock on the door, apologize, say there was a mistake, that they'd turned around at the last gas station. I stared out the window so long the moon slid across the glass like a whisper. But no lights came down the drive. No voices called my name. By morning, the towel was still folded. The house was quiet except for a radio in the kitchen playing old jazz through static. Walter stood at the stove flipping pancakes with mechanical focus. He didn't ask if I'd slept well. He just set a plate in front of me and said, "Eat." I didn't ask when they were coming back. I couldn't. What would have hurt more? Hearing soon or hearing nothing at all? Walter didn't ask questions, and I learned not to offer answers. Each morning he rose before the sun, the clatter of pans and hiss of the percolator echoing through the walls like clockwork. I followed the scent of burnt coffee into the kitchen, where he moved with the same precision I'd later see in his hands when he fixed a broken fuse or rebuilt an old carburetor. Breakfast was toast always slightly burned at the edges. Sometimes he'd leave out 2 slices, one near black, one golden, and I never knew if it was by accident or design. I always took the burnt one. He never sat across from me. He stood at the sink, sipping from a chipped mug that read Whitmore Lumber 1974, as if he'd already eaten elsewhere. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards adjusting to the day. He didn't treat me like a guest, but he didn't treat me like an inconvenience either. In the afternoons, I wandered. The yard stretched into wheat-colored fields, bordered by rusted fences and tractor ruts. There was a shed behind the barn, half workshop, half graveyard of forgotten machines. Walter spent hours there, sleeves rolled grease painting his forearms, an old transistor radio murmuring baseball scores in the corner. One day I lingered by the door too long. He looked up, then down at the socket wrench in his hand. "Want to try?" he asked. I didn't answer, just stepped forward. He showed me how to loosen the bolt, how to hold steady. My hands were too small. I dropped the wrench twice, but he didn't flinch or sigh. He waited. When the bolt finally turned, he smiled. Just once. But it was the kind of smile that felt earned. We didn't speak of it afterward. He just handed me a cloth to wipe the grease and returned to work. Evenings were silent. Dinner was simple boiled potatoes, beans, the occasional meatloaf reheated from a frozen tray. We ate at the table like co-workers after a long shift. The radio played softly in the background big band tunes or farm reports. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling's cracks like constellations. Sometimes I'd trace words in my mind, sentences I would say if they ever came back. I missed you. Did you miss me? Did you know I stayed quiet to be easier to forget? But I never said them aloud, not to Walter, not to anyone. Instead, I began to leave small notes on the workshop bench. Just scribbles, grease cap loose, or saw blade slipping. He never mentioned them. But the next day, they'd be fixed. He didn't praise, he didn't scold, but the shed door was never locked again. It was late October when I opened the wrong drawer. I'd been looking for masking tape in the old oak desk tucked beside the workshop's back wall. Most of the drawers held what you'd expect: nuts, nails, folded shop towels, a flashlight that never worked, but one stuck on the pull. I jiggled it loose and outslid a manila folder with my name written across the top in a pen I recognized as Walter's. I froze. Inside, a court document from 2003, stamped in black ink and clipped neatly at the corner. Voluntary termination of parental rights. Elaine and Dennis Whitmore. The air shifted. The workshop, always warm with the smell of sawdust and grease, suddenly felt sterile, distant. My hands trembled. I read it again. My name. Their signatures. The date. I did the math. I'd been barely 14. No visitation rights. No appeal. No plans for reunification. Just closure. I sat on the stool and held the folder in my lap like it might catch fire. I waited for the part of me that still hoped, the one that still wrote sentences in the dark, rehearsed them like prayers to fight back. But it didn't. I didn't cry. Not right then. I folded the paper neatly, slid it back in place, and closed the drawer. Walter had never told me, not once. And yet he'd saved the paper, tucked it where I might eventually find it. I didn't ask him why. I was afraid he'd tell me what the court already had. They let you go. That night he made chili, burned the bottom like always. I stirred mine in slow circles, watching the flecks of pepper float. He didn't notice my silence, or maybe he did, and just knew better than to touch it. After dinner, he pulled a small wooden box from the hall closet. "Found this when I cleaned the barn," he said. Inside was a rusted compass and a pocket knife with the initials HW etched into the side. "Yours, if you want it." I nodded, unsure what he was really giving me. The box stayed on my nightstand after that. I never used the knife, but I liked knowing it was there. The next morning, he didn't ask if I'd slept. I didn't ask if he knew I'd seen the file. We went about our routine, feeding the chickens, checking the fencing near the pasture. But something had shifted. He handed me a wrench mid-repair, and our fingers brushed. For a second, I thought he might say something. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "You'll need your own set soon." That was his way. No apologies, no promises. Just space to stay and tools to build with. That night, I added a new sentence to the list I kept in my head. If they come back, don't ask why they left. Ask why they stayed gone. I didn't think of it as engineering at first. I just wanted to fix things that didn't work the way they should. A rusty hinge, a broken latch, the busted heater in the barn that coughed more than it warmed. Walter noticed. He didn't say it, but he started leaving things: half-repaired wire spools, out-of-place diagrams, half-drawn screws just loose enough. I took the bait every time. When I was 16, I read a magazine article about a wheelchair that folded into a backpack. The idea stuck. Ours hadn't worked right since the war, Walter said. I wanted to build something he wouldn't have to fight with. I sketched late into the night, arms sore from welding practice and YouTube tutorials on an old laptop that wheezed like it had asthma. One weekend I told him I needed aluminum tubing, thin but strong. I'd already checked the prices online. He didn't say anything. Just disappeared into town and came back empty-handed except for an envelope with a receipt and $4.72 in change. I didn't ask what he sold, but the next time I went out to the shed, the old Ford was gone from the back lot. The one with the cracked windshield and the faded bumper sticker that said, "Railroaders don't quit." He said it needed too many repairs. I never believed him. The prototype took 8 months. It was clunky ugly, but it folded, and it rolled. I submitted it to the Ohio Young Inventors Fair with a 3-page essay and a grainy demo video Walter recorded holding the camera like it might bite him. I won 3rd place. The judge called it practical but uninspired. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the letter that arrived 2 weeks later, an offer to join a state-sponsored STEM cohort with a partial scholarship to a public university if I could keep my grades up. Walter didn't say congratulations. He just handed me a box of assorted screws and said, "You'll need these." At graduation, the gym was packed. Families brought balloons, flowers, noise. My friends took photos in dresses and ties. I wore jeans and the only blouse that didn't have grease on the cuffs. Walter sat in the back row, clean-shaven for the first time in a year. He didn't wave. But when I crossed the stage, I heard one pair of hands clap longer than the rest. Afterward, I found him leaning against the truck he'd borrowed from the neighbor. He handed me a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and said, "Figured you'd be hungry." We drove home with the windows down. The sky was clear, the air soft. He didn't say he was proud. He didn't need to. On my 25th birthday, Walter made pancakes from scratch. The kitchen smelled like browned butter and burnt edges. A record played in the background, Benny Goodman's Soft and Crackling. He set a wrapped box on the table beside my coffee mug. No ribbon, just wax paper folded neat. Inside was a brass pocket watch. Heavy. Cold. The back was engraved with 2 words, "Grace Forward." I traced them with my thumb. The cover opened with a click. The hands didn't tick. But the face was clean white and still. I didn't understand what made it special. But I didn't say that. I only asked yours. He nodded, and now it's yours. He didn't explain more, just pushed the rest of the pancakes onto my plate and told me to eat before they got stiff. I wore the watch around my neck that day, tucked under my shirt like it needed to be close to something warm. That night we watched the sunset from the back porch. He lit his pipe. I told him about a new project at work, some modular mobility device they wanted me to lead. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "About time someone saw what you can build." It was the last thing he ever said to me. The next morning the kitchen was silent. No smell of coffee, no hum of radio. His boots were by the door laces still tied. I found him in his bedroom lying on top of the quilt he'd had since I was a kid. One hand rested over his chest, the other open. Like he'd meant to reach for something. I touched his arm. Cold. I don't remember calling the ambulance, or the neighbors who came to stand in the doorway, hats pressed to chests offering condolences they didn't know how to speak. What I do remember is sitting at the edge of the porch, watch clutched in my fist, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. He'd been the only one who stayed, the only one who never asked me to be someone else or someone easier to leave. The house echoed that week. Every corner felt too quiet. The barn light flickered even when I replaced the bulb. I half expected him to come through the door muttering about voltage or bad wiring, but he didn't. I hung the watch on a nail above the sink. It didn't tick, but I looked at it every morning like it might. The church pews filled slowly that morning. Farmers in pressed flannel, retired engineers in faded ties, women who'd baked casseroles in silence for years. No flowers. Walter never liked the fuss. I sat in the second row, just behind the casket, my hands folded in my lap like I was holding something delicate I didn't want to drop. Halfway through the service, the door opened behind me. I turned instinct more than curiosity. Elaine and Dennis. I hadn't seen their faces in 14 years, but somehow I knew them before I knew them. The way my mother's scarf was knotted just so. The way my father's expression flickered between patience and calculation. They walked down the center aisle like they belonged there. Elaine's heels clicked. Dennis nodded at a few strangers. They slid into the front pew like nothing had happened. Like this was just another chapter in a story they were still writing. After the final hymn, Elaine turned and met my eyes. She stood and opened her arms. "Oh, Ruth," she whispered, folding me into a hug before I could move. "You've grown so much. I've missed you." I didn't return the gesture. My arms stayed at my sides, stiff as fence posts. She smelled like lilac and money. Dennis offered a handshake, then pulled me close for a one-armed embrace I didn't return. "I didn't know you were coming," I said flatly. Elaine's eyes shimmered. "Of course we came. We were devastated when we heard. Walter meant so much to us." I didn't say what I wanted to that Walter never spoke their names. Not once. Outside in the shade of the sycamores, they led me toward the parking lot, away from the neighbors offering potato salad and polite memories. "We should catch up," Elaine said. "Talk. About everything Walter left behind." There it was. I stopped walking. "What exactly are you here for?" I asked. Dennis's smile was tight. "To help. It's a lot to manage. The farm, the house, the assets. You're young. You shouldn't have to do this alone." Elaine placed a manicured hand on my arm. "We want to be a family again," she said softly. "It's what Walter would have wanted." I pulled away. "You signed me away," I said. "I wasn't a secret. I was a burden. You didn't lose me. You left me." Elaine's smile twitched. "That's not fair, Ruth." "No," I said. "It's not." Dennis stepped forward, voice calm. "Don't let bitterness get in the way of practicality. He left a lot behind. It affects all of us." I looked at them, well-dressed, rehearsed, already thinking in dollar signs. "He's not even in the ground yet," I said. "And you're already circling." They blinked. But I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back toward the church, toward the people who had shown up long before the money did. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and fresh printer ink, walls lined with degrees. A window behind the desk looked out over the river, the water gray and low. Her name was Margaret Blake, late 60s, sharp blazer hair like steel wool pulled into a bun. She didn't smile much. I liked that. Elaine and Dennis were already seated when I arrived. Margaret didn't offer pleasantries, just motioned for me to sit. "This won't take long," she said, opening a folder. I glanced at my parents. Elaine folded her hands neatly in her lap. Dennis leaned back like this was routine. Margaret cleared her throat. "Walter C. Whitmore's estate has been legally transferred in full to Ruth A. Whitmore, his granddaughter and legal ward." She paused. The room tightened. Elaine broke the silence. "That can't be right. Walter never discussed any of this with us." Margaret didn't blink. "He didn't need to. You relinquished guardianship in 2009. I have the documents." She pulled out a signed form. Black ink, clear date. Dennis's mouth twitched. "We were advised to do that at the time for Ruth's stability." Margaret continued. "Walter's estate includes the farm, 4 parcels of surrounding land, 2 patents in ongoing use, and majority shares in Whitmore Solutions Incorporated. Total value just over $92 million. I gripped the chair arms. The number didn't register. I only heard one word, Walter. Elaine leaned forward, voice warm. "Darling, with that kind of responsibility, you'll need guidance. Support." "We can help." Margaret raised a hand. Mr. Whitmore anticipated this. She opened a small black case and pulled out a scanner. "May I see the watch?" I hesitated, then removed it from my neck and placed it on the desk. Margaret opened the back panel, revealing a tiny QR chip beneath the face. She scanned it. A green light blinked. "Verified," she said. Dennis frowned. "What the hell is this?" Margaret didn't answer him. She turned to me. "Your grandfather encrypted the will's activation to the watch biometrically coded to your pulse pattern. No one else can claim the estate. The documentation, witness records, and encryption logs are all in this folder. You are the sole heir, Ruth." Elaine stood, her voice cracked. "You can't be serious. She's a child." I looked at her. "I'm 25. "You don't know what you're doing," Dennis added. "This could ruin you. We'll contest it." Margaret met his stare. "You're welcome to try. But be advised the watch, the biometric lock, and your prior surrender of parental rights make this airtight. You will lose." Elaine's face paled. She turned to me, eyes wide. "Ruth, you don't want a war in court, do you? Just talk to us?" I stood the watch cool in my hand. "You've had 14 years to talk to me," I said. "You chose silence." Dennis glared. "You'll regret this." I walked out before Margaret could say another word. The hallway smelled like floor wax and something burnt. Outside, the river moved slow and sure. I held the watch tight, feeling the tick that wasn't there, just the echo of everything Walter had prepared long before I even knew I'd need it. I returned to the farm by dusk. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Walter's old truck. The porch light was on, though I hadn't left it that way. A small thing, but it set something off inside me. The house was quiet, too quiet. I did a walk through doors, locked nothing out of place, but still the air felt touched, as if someone had stood too long in the center of the kitchen just staring. The next morning I found a manila envelope tucked under the front gate. Inside, a formal notice, intent to challenge the will, filed by Dennis and Elaine Whitmore, natural parents of Ruth A. Whitmore, on grounds of undue influence and questionable mental competency of deceased party. Below it, a second envelope. No letter. Just printed screenshots of my grandfather's last medical visits, highlighted for blood pressure and cognitive decline. They were playing dirty. That same afternoon, they appeared. Again. A black SUV rolled up the dirt road like a hearse that didn't know when to stop coming. Elaine stepped out first, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Dennis followed, phone already in hand. I stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed. I told you not to come back. Elaine smiled like it hurt. We want to resolve this peacefully. Dennis didn't smile. You're not thinking clearly, Ruth. This place, this burden, it'll break you. I didn't answer. We've spoken to a few people, Elaine continued. There's press interest. A young woman inherits $90 million and pushes out her dying grandfather's own children. That'll make headlines. I clenched the railing. Dennis took a step forward. We're offering you a deal. Sell us partial stake in the land. Keep the house, the watch, whatever else you're sentimental about. In return, we'll drop the challenge. They were offering to buy silence, to rewrite history with a handshake. I looked at the fields behind them, the same ones Walter and I used to ride horses through at dawn. I could almost hear the rusted bell he rang when it was time for supper. You think this place will ruin me? I said, stepping down from the porch. It raised me. You left. It stayed. Elaine's jaw tightened. You don't have to do this, Ruth. You don't have to be alone. I stared at her for a long moment. I was alone, I said. When I waited by the window every birthday, when I brought Walter cocoa during his chemo and watched him fall asleep mid-sentence. Where were you then? Dennis's voice dropped low. You'll regret shutting us out. I opened the gate. Then, sue me, and I shut it behind them. A week after they left, I found the tin box. It was buried beneath the floorboards of Walter's study, where the rug had always sat uneven. I'd moved the desk to clean and saw the small iron hook. Just a sliver, but enough. Inside, his journals. And on top of them, a letter in his script firm, slanted, deliberate. Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But if I raised you right then, you're still standing head high. That's all I ever wanted. This land is yours. But I never meant it just for crops or memory. I meant it for something more. I read the rest by the light of the shed lamp, the same bulb we replaced together after the frost that first year. His words spilled out across the pages, diagrams of robotics workshops, cost breakdowns for mobile classrooms, outreach plans to support kids raised like me, discarded, underestimated, hungry for a place to belong. He called it the Whitmore Circle, not a charity, a foundation, where kids like me could come build, fail, and build again, with dignity. I stayed in the shed till morning, surrounded by blueprints and grit. When the sun rose, I called Margaret Blake. She listened quietly, then said, "He told me you'd find it." By fall, I'd turned the old equipment barn into the first prototype lab, hired a retired engineer from Eugene, ordered parts in bulk. Margaret helped file the nonprofit paperwork. My days filled with voices again, not Walter's, but the nervous laughter of children assembling their first circuits, blowing fuses, cheering when the lights blinked on. The first girl to finish a project was named Claire, age 11, foster care since 5. She built a robotic arm that poured water into a cup. She asked if she could keep it. I said no. She cried. Then I gave her the soldering iron and said, "Build a better one." She did. Some evenings I still sit on the porch with the watch around my neck, listening for sounds I know won't come back: the weight of Walter's boots on the stairs, the scrape of his chair on the kitchen floor. But then I see Claire chasing another student through the field. I see the lights flicker in the lab. I feel the pulse of something more than grief. They called it an inheritance. But what he really left me was a reason. It was near Thanksgiving when they came again. I was sweeping leaves from the porch. The wind carried a bite, and the sky hung heavy with gray. I saw the same black SUV approach slower this time, tires crackling over gravel like it didn't want to arrive. Elaine stepped out alone. No sunglasses, no jewelry. Just a beige coat and eyes that seemed smaller than I remembered. I didn't move from the steps. "Hi," she said. Silence stretched. "I'm not here to fight," she added. "Just to see." She looked around, eyes scanning the lab, the sign that read the Whitmore Circle, and the group of kids racing toward the barn with wires in their arms. "I read about it in the papers," she said, voice barely above the wind. "I didn't know you'd actually do something with it." I didn't respond. She stepped forward but stopped at the porch gate, hands clenched tight. "You were always like him, even when you were little." That struck something, but I kept my voice even. "You didn't come to say that." Elaine shook her head. "No, I came to say, I'm sorry. For everything. We were scared, Ruth. And selfish. But mostly scared." A gust lifted the last of the leaves from the ground. She flinched as they swirled around her boots. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it. But you should know your father's sick. Pancreatic. It's not going to be long." I nodded once. No words came. She looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to come. I wouldn't blame you." I watched as she turned back to the car, her steps slower, shoulders hunched like the wind had finally worn through her. The car pulled away without a sound. That night I sat alone in the shed, the soldering iron still warm in my hand. Outside, the wind howled, and inside the ring on my finger caught the light. Legacy. It didn't need to be loud. Or final. Only true. There's a room above the barn, a narrow wooden loft Walter once used to store broken tools and spare wire. Now it holds a desk, a kettle, and a window that watches the entire valley. I come here sometimes after the children have gone home, when the wind slips in through the shutters and the field below breathes soft beneath the moonlight. Tonight I sat with my journal open, not to write, but to feel the weight of the silence between pages. The ring rested on my desk. I turned it slowly, tracing the word. Legacy. Walter built this with calloused hands and quiet patience, not for praise, not for revenge, but because he believed in building even when everything else breaks. The past never gave me closure. It didn't hand me apologies or neat endings, and I've stopped expecting them. But it gave me something else, a place to begin. Claire will take over the robotics program next year. She's training 2 others to mentor the incoming class. I see pieces of myself in them, nervous, stubborn, brilliant. Sometimes I wonder if they see me the way I once saw Walter, and if they do, I hope they never learn too quickly just how heavy it is to carry someone else's hope. But I'll carry it until it's time to pass the ring. When I locked the shed that evening, the air was colder, the sky quieter, but the lights in the lab still burned, faint, steady, enough.